top hats and mutton shoes, erotic intense midnight cruise, whirling gay society in 1903. Sigmund Freud's Vienna's hype identifies the homotype, the intermediate sex, and heterodoxy. The gay wave moves across the sea. Hello there, Miss Liberty. Betty Boop is hot and hooches out in the cold. Greenwich Village, Bloomsbury, gays in high society. Harlem Night, Chicago fights, Leopold and Loeb. Pride, gotta have pride. Better run too long to keep it inside. Pride gets it back and watch from the side. Pride is power and power is pride. It's time to celebrate all the colors of the rainbow. Get out into the streets, follow the tide.
Hi, I'm Brian McNaught, and this is Stonewall Portraits, Profiles, and Pride, a half-hour oral biography of individuals in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement who have made a difference in the lives of others. And the guest today has certainly done that. Representative, or City Council member, Fort Worth City Council member, Joel Burns, on Columbus Day, 2010, when you were 41 years old, made a speech about bullying to your colleagues that went viral. 3 million people saw it on YouTube, another 3 million through other sources. You cried, other people cried, you got on Ellen, Matt Lauer. How did all of this happen? What happened?
What happened was a series of experiences that I, in all honesty, kind of put aside. I had, at some point in September, seen a news story about a young man, a 13-year-old named Asher Brown, outside of Houston, suburban Houston, who had for years been harassed by 4 boys who taunted him, called him names, shoved him down stairways, shoved him into lockers, and he went home one day and killed himself. Took his father's gun, his shotgun, in his mother and father's closet, put it to his head, and pulled the trigger. And I read this story, and I was so very pained by it, both because of my own experience of being beaten up behind the Crowley High School gymnasium as a freshman, 13-year-old, by some seniors.
Why did they do that?
I don't know. Because I was vulnerable and a 13-year-old, and they perceived me to be gay, and chose to rough me up one day after
Did you tell
school.
your parents that you were beaten up because you were gay?
No, in fact, when I made my comments at City Council, it was the first time I'd ever told anyone about it, because I was ashamed. It was, I grew up in a rural community south of Fort Worth, Texas. My dad was a part-time rancher. My mom played the piano for the United Methodist Church there in town, and I was afraid that if I told them that I'd gotten beaten up, they would ask me why.
Right.
That there had to be some reason.
Right.
And that was something that I didn't want to share.
I tell audiences that kids that get called fag can't go home and tell their parents, unlike kids who are called a derogatory word because of their race or their religion. We don't have anyone to go home and talk to.
Absolutely. In most cases, that is absolutely correct. And that's why it was that shame and that fear that prevented me from telling my parents about that experience and about what it led to.
Did other kids know that you got beaten up?
I think that there were, obviously, the friends of the bullies did.
Did you think you deserved it?
No, absolutely not.
Did you have a clear idea that you were gay at that age, as a freshman?
No, I think I had a clear idea that there was something different about me. You know, growing up in the 1970s and 80s in Texas, particularly in a rural community, we would see images on the news and on TV, and would think, okay, well, gay is something that is in San Francisco and New York, and I'm not in either of those places, so I can't be gay.
Right.
Obviously, that's the inner workings of a 13-year-old's mind, but.
Were you effeminate as a 13-year-old?
No, I don't know. I don't want to weigh in on that. I don't.
Well, yesterday I watched you have a hard time jumping in the water off the boat
Now,
because
Brian, you weren't going to bring that up, and now you're going to do it on TV.
So were you like? So is that why you got beaten up at 13?
It wasn't because I found seaweed icky like yesterday. I was who I was. I was a tall, lanky kid. I grew really fast, as I mentioned in the council comments, and was tall and skinny and kind of awkward. And I played basketball, and I didn't play it very well. I was not. I wasn't the most popular kid in the class. I wasn't unpopular. So, I was fairly social, and I don't know. Perhaps it depends on your definition of what is effeminate.
When did you come out to yourself and to others?
I started. It was later in high school that I really kind of started thinking, okay, this is probably where things are headed. It wasn't until I was 20 when I met my first boyfriend and we were each other's first that I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. I'm gay, and this is a reality. And not long after that, came out to my parents, and then subsequently, the rest of the world. And when I ran for city council, there was, in 2007. I mean, I'd been married since 1993 to the same man, and
Married in your, not legally, but in your mind that you were married.
We
'cause you
were
in
fully
Texas.
wedded to one another in a
Yeah.
committed way. We didn't have the legal recognition for it until 10 years later, but we were married in 93. First day of spring, beautiful day on a hilltop in West Texas. And so I got married fairly young, and so most of my entire adulthood in Fort Worth was being married with JD. And so there wasn't anyone who came to know me that didn't know also JD and know that I'm gay. And so when I ran for city council in 2007, I had to sit down with my family and say, I've been out for a long time, but you're about to go through an experience of coming out that you may not be familiar with. You're going to see me on the front page of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and my opponents, there were six opponents, 7 of us in the race. They're going to talk about me being gay, and you're going to come in contact with people at the grocery store and at Walgreens and at your Sunday school class who are going to be talking about what's on the front page of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and that you have a gay son, you have a gay brother, you have a gay uncle. And that's an experience you may not have prepared yourself for in ways that I've had the last 20 years to prepare for.
How did you know to do that? Because I think my parents, felt before they died that I sort of threw them into the national spotlight without them having a choice or even preparation for it, which I regret.
Anytime anyone runs for office, you have to invest those people around you into the effort, and you invest them in different ways. If it's a casual voter, you're standing at their front door, giving them a leaflet, asking them to vote for you. If it's your closer friends or business community, things like that, you're asking them for contribution. If you're asking your family, you have to engage them in a way that reminds them that you love them and that you want them to continue loving you, and that it's going to be a difficulty. Because running for office, you lay yourself bare, and you lay yourself open to people's criticism, whether just or not just, and that criticism is felt by those who love you.
Did they have any negative reaction to you running, and did they have any negative impact on their personal lives as a result of you running as an openly gay person?
When I first called my mom and said, hey, can we meet at my sister and brother-in-law's house and maybe go swimming and have hamburgers, JD and I have something to tell you, my mom's first response was, are you pregnant? And I said, no, it's something else. And she said, oh, okay. And we told our family, and my parents are very, very apolitical, and my parents have never had a yard sign in their yard. They've never had a political bumper sticker on their car. They don't talk about politics. So it's something outside of their realm. But I want to tell you a story, and I haven't told very many people this, so it's nice to get to say it on your show. my mom, who, as I said, is apolitical, you know, I would continue to kind of chidingly encourage her to come get involved in the campaign. And on Saturday mornings, we'd fix the volunteers breakfast. We'd all go block walking in the neighborhood. That's what we call it in Texas, where you go door to door. And then there would be some volunteers who'd make lunch for everyone. Everyone would come back at 1 and, you know, turn in their clipboards with their sheets about who they talked to, etc. And finally, my mom started coming to do this, and there was she chose this fairly affluent neighborhood that she got assigned to the first week, and she walked, and she kind of enjoyed it. It wasn't too bad. And so a few weeks later, she came back again, and then she came back a week or two later, and came back a week or two later. So she liked going back to the same neighborhood. She wanted to do the entire neighborhood. And one day, she knocked on a door, and the man who answered the door, you know, she started asking him, and she saw his name, and she said, is your wife so-and-so? And he said, yes. And he said, are you my wife's Bible study fellowship leader? My mom said, yes, I've known your wife for years. She's in my BSF class. My mom was the leader of the Bible study fellowship. And he kind of, you know, he put his arm around her and kind of drew her in, and they talked about, you know, his wife and their family, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, my mom said, oh, and, you know, the whole reason I'm here is, you know, I want you to be sure to vote for my son, Joel Burns, who's running for city council. And he said, well, I admire you for doing that, but I know it must be really tough for you to go out and have to do this for someone you know is going to hell. And it devastated my mom. I mean, she just, you know, he basically pulled her in and sucker punched her. And, you know, she started crying, and my dad was waiting for my mom out at the curb. He's not the type to go talk to folks, so his contribution was to drive my mom. And, you know, she went back to the campaign headquarters, and she had makeup down her face, and you know, clearly something was wrong. And the women who had stayed in the office, who kind of cleaned up after breakfast and helped get lunch ready, who I never really understood or knew why these two women would always come and do that for me. They just kind of came out of the woodwork and just started volunteering for me. They were there and consoled my mom, and my mom told the story, and it turns out that both of them had gay kids, and part of the reason that they came on Saturday mornings and volunteered at my campaign headquarters was they were able to do something for me that they weren't able to do for their own children. Mm-hmm. And they shared that with my mom, and my mom told me, you know, Joel, I'm not ever going to be able to do this. That was a devastating experience, and, you know, it was very personal, and I just don't think I can ever do it. And 2 weeks later, she showed up on a Saturday morning. She didn't tell me she was going to come. And I tell that story because I want to remind people who consider putting themselves out there in a public way, whether it's running for public office or doing anything, that oftentimes they have a fear that they will be exposing their wife, their husband, their children to this public thing that is potentially damaging to their family. And while there is risk, and it is a difficult thing to run for office, it's also an amazing opportunity for the people you love to show you in ways that you may never expect that they love you. And the Saturday morning that my mom walked back into the campaign headquarters after she had gone through that just humiliating experience, it was something that I will cherish forever. And it was a great experience, and it was, you forget that when you put yourself out there in that way, you give other people opportunities to really step in and do things in a way that you may never expect that are awe-inspiring.
So after your mom is gone, you'll remember that moment more than what happened with the bullying speech?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me about the bullying speech. You were very upset about a kid who had taken his life for being gay. You wrote a speech the night before.
No, actually, a few hours before.
Oh, you wrote the speech a few hours before.
Yeah, and
in a pink shirt that you donated to the Stonewall National Museum and Archive, which is,
at your request, I donated it.
Yes.
And I was honored to do so. We were all wearing those pink polo shirts as a breast cancer awareness. We do that once a year. Typically, I'm in a suit. That literally is the only week of the year I'm not in a coat and tie.
Oh, no kidding.
It was interesting that was the day.
So everyone in the world thought that Fort Worth city councilors dressed in
have
polo
a pink
shirts
uniform. Yes,
as part of their day. Yeah.
But You know, I serve on the city council, and I get phone calls all day, every day from people who need things fixed, and that's my job description. They call about their potholes or fixing their sidewalks, or that they've got to, their trash cans are being knocked over, and I fix those things. That's my job. And when I read that first story, I said to myself, well, there's someone's job out there that is to fix this. Someone needs to do something about this. There's someone who in their job, it's to take care of this horrible tragedy that happened. My job's to fix the potholes, fix the sidewalks, make sure the trash cans are picked up. So that's not my job. It's outside of my job description. But I desperately wanted someone to do something about it. And the next week I read another story of another teen who killed himself, and the next week another story. And I had this just painful sinking feeling that there was no one out there doing anything about it. I should acknowledge that the week that I made my comments, I think it was the week before, Dan Savage had actually put together the itgetsbetter.org. I unfortunately hadn't seen it, didn't know what he was doing, so it was kind of dumb luck. And so in retrospect, I can't say that no one was out there doing anything about this awful tragedy, but I didn't see that. And I read the story on a Tuesday morning of a young man who had gone to a Norman, Oklahoma City Council meeting where they were debating some discrimination ordinances, anti-discrimination ordinances in the city of Norman, which is where OU is. And some of the folks testifying had said some really disparaging things about gay people, and it created this downward spiral for this 19-year-old who later went home and did the exact same thing that Asher did. He got his dad's shotgun, put it to his head, and pulled the trigger. And I thought, my God, if some kid kills himself after attending a city council meeting in Oklahoma, I am certainly warranted to spend part of my city council meeting talking about it. And the way our day is set up is we have committee meetings in the morning on Tuesday, we have a lunch break, we go into pre-council, and then at 7 o'clock at night we have our main council meeting. And I was in one of those meetings, and I was paying attention, but I happened to read this article, and I thought, this is a signal to me that whether or not this is part of my job description, someone has to say something about this, and it might as well be me. And I really thought that my audience was going to be mostly Fort Worth people, Fort Worth kids, folks who were bored watching municipal access cable, those type of things, or that it might be able to be used within high schools in the future. I never thought it would go beyond Fort Worth. And I went home at lunch, and a kind of weird stream of consciousness hammered it out. I never edited it once. I went back to pre-council and waited, and I wasn't sure until I walked into the room that I was going to read it. There is a kind of fear, I think, that grips people in ways that's unfortunate when they take on anything that has a risk. They think about, anytime you do anything outside of what the social norms are, we learn at a very young age. We start out boisterous and loud, and we call out injustices on the playground, and we run and jump, and our teachers reprimand us for speaking out, our parents punish us, our friends over time threaten to take away their friendship, our loved ones threaten to take away their love if we do things outside of what they expect of us. And talking about teenage suicide and bullying was not something anyone expected of their city council member. And with that came a fear, and I reference it in the video, which you can find online at on youtube.com/Joel Burns.
Okay, so YouTube, go to YouTube and just go to Joel, Joel, Burns, Burns,
Yes.
and it'll show you this 12-minute.
Yes, you can either search for Joel Burns, or you can literally go to youtube.com.
I did that this
Joel Burns.
morning.
Okay.
You're all over Google.
Yes. And so in posting, in making the decision to do that, there was some fear, and I referenced it. I say, there may be some political outcome from this that is not good. People may choose not to vote for me or not support me, and that's okay. And I will tell you, it's been a great trade-off in regards to that, in that I've come in contact with countless young adults and teens from all over the world in the last year and a half. It's a year and a half later, and I'm still, on almost a weekly basis, I get at least one email and one message on Facebook.
Okay, if I can.
Uh-huh.
So you read the speech that you wrote, you cried during it,
Yeah.
right? And how did it get on YouTube?
Kind of dumb luck. The ABC local affiliate reporter had already she was the Fort Worth reporter. She'd already put together her story, put it to bed for the night, and was in her studio working on something else. And we stream our council meetings live online. She happened to look over and see everyone stand up at the end and give me the standing ovation, and wondered what was going on. And then the mayor said, we're going to take a 10-minute recess, and we never recess our council meetings. And so she realized something was up. She called our public information officer for the city of Fort Worth, said, what's going on? He said, I really don't know what just happened. But Joel, Councilmember Burns, gave the speech, and it was about teenage suicide and bullying, and I don't know where it came from or what happened. And she said, can I get a video of it? I want to see it. I think this may be a big deal. And so the cable office for the city got her a DVD during our break. We went back to council. We had another 5 hours of council meeting. We were there until after midnight. We had zoning cases and all kinds of things, and I had to, wipe away the tears and then go back to work. And
Talking about potholes and
sidewalks,
trash
cans.
Trash cans.
And
Which you get how much a year for?
we get paid $24,000 a year.
$24,000 a year.
That's actually well paid for most city councils in Texas. And I spend about 40
And
plus
you're
hours.
43 years old, and you spend how many hours a week on your job?
40 to 50.
40 to 50 hours a week, and you get $24,000. Okay.
So she comes and gets the video, and she decides to go live at 10 o'clock to lead off the newscast. And when she does that, both my city phone and my personal phone are sitting on the desk, and they just explode. The public information officer had actually walked over to me just before she went on camera and said, you need to know that Channel 8 is setting out front in front of City Hall to go live at 10. And I realized, oh, I never told my mom and dad about this experience where I got beat up and considered taking my life as a 13-year-old. And I had to excuse myself from the meeting. We have a little button that says whether or not we're present or absent. Press that, run out into the hall, call my mom and said, Mom, Channel 8's about to go live from City Hall in the 10 o'clock newscast about some comments that I made earlier tonight about being bullied in school and where that left me. And told her a little bit about it, and she said, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I said, I think it's a good thing. And I heard her kind of describe it to my dad, and I could hear my dad in the background say, I told you, you needed to get a gun and you need a security system at your house. And I was like, and so and then my mom...
He was worried about your safety.
He was worried about my safety. And my mom said to me, was there anything we could have done different?
Was there any reason for them to be worried about your safety? Did you get any threatening response to your...
It was universally positive. Like I said, I got 20,000 emails in that first week. I was receiving 100 phone calls an hour at one point.
100 phone calls an hour?
Yes. The city had to change its
city
phone
councilor who gets $23,000 a year. 100 phone calls an hour?
Yes.
And how many emails?
More than 20,000 in the first week and another 10,000.
And you
8,000
answered
messages on
every
Facebook.
single one of those? You had people come in and help you?
Absolutely. One of the things was that kids, I told kids in crisis to call, and most of the emails and calls were from adults or young adults who had similar experiences, and they wanted to either thank me or they wanted to, express that they had similar experiences. And so I had to get I have one council aide, I have one assistant, but I had to get family and friends to come in and kind of man my city council office to triage these emails so that, the ones that were congratulatory or thanking or whatever, we put in a pile, basically in a folder, that they got, kind of a generic, I really appreciate you touching base. The ones who were adults who needed resource because they thought their kids were being bullied or whatever, we then kind of triaged them into more finite groups and got them messages out on about a daily, every other day basis. And then the kids in crisis, we tried to connect immediately. And it was everything from a 14-year-old girl in Oklahoma City whose stepdad was sexually abusing her to, it wasn't just LGBT kids, but they saw a sympathetic face and they saw a phone number and they were in crisis, and so they called.
So on Columbus Day 2010, your life changed completely. You were a realtor before you got into city council. Mm-hmm. You gave up money to go to city council. You made more than $24,000 a year as a realtor.
Quite a bit.
So your life was about service as an openly gay person, but that was nowhere near as big as this speech that at a time the nation was dealing with bullying went across the world and continues to be seen. So in one instant you become a profile in Pride, right? A role model. A different generation than mine, because so many, there haven't been a lot from your generation who have emerged to this status. What do you do with that? How do you go from being, Joel Burns, Fort Worth city councilor who deals with potholes, to Joel Burns who becomes a sensation and is invited to go on Ellen DeGeneres' program and Matt Lauer's program and NPR. How do you handle that?
It's an incremental thing. I remember the morning after you asked how this happened. At 10 o'clock when my phone blows up, a friend offers to, he says, "You're going to put this on YouTube tonight." And I said, I don't really know how to do that. I may do it this weekend. He said, "Oh, no, you don't understand." And so he put it up for me. And the next morning I went on about my life. I had a breakfast meeting with the neighborhood president and et cetera, all these meetings, and I come back at lunchtime and I look and 5,000 people had seen the YouTube video, and I thought, 5,000, that's crazy that 5,000 people would see this. And by mid-afternoon it was 20,000, and then the interview calls started coming in, and then Inside Edition showed up on my mom and dad's front porch. And at that point I knew that it was going to grow.
How do they feel about this instant celebrity being the parents of the gay city councilor who made the bullying speech everyone saw and cried at? Because people didn't just watch your video, they cried with you.
I think it was
Did
very
Ellen
tough.
DeGeneres cry, did she tell you, when she saw it?
Yes.
So she cried too.
My recollection is that she told me that afterwards.
Did Matt Lauer?
I don't know. I didn't ask him. It was hard for my mom and dad. They didn't want that public spotlight. That's not their nature, not their personality. I remember I was coming out of the Today Show, and I'd had some calls from the Ellen Show, and I was walking out. I'd just finished the interview, and the producers for Ellen had seen it, and they said, "Okay, we want you to come out right now from New York." I was about to go get on a plane to go home to DFW, but we want you to fly to LAX and be on the show tomorrow, and we want you to bring your mother. And I said, "Well, my mom's not going to come do this." And the producer said, "We've already bought her a ticket. She needs to be at DFW in about 2.5, 3 hours, and we'd like to have you both come out." And so I called my mom, and I basically made the pitch for it. And she's like, "Oh, well, okay, I'll go get in the shower." And then as I was on the way to the airport, I called her again, and she said, "Joel, your dad has got these things going on, and I'm busy, and I've got choir practice, and et cetera, and I just don't think I can do it." And I said, "I understand that, and I will totally respect that, and I will not begrudge you doing this. But also think about, we're never going to have this experience as a mother and son ever again. I mean, this is going on a nationally syndicated, top popular TV show, and it's not anything we're ever going to get another chance to do." And it's been a harrowing. At this point, it had been almost a week since I'd made my comments, and I was exhausted. I hadn't planned to travel but for one day to New York, and it ended up being 4 days, and I got on a bunch of different programs, and I was exhausted, and I really wanted. It would have been nice to see my mom. just to have her there. And I said that to her, and she said, well, I just don't think I can do it. And of course, this was in the days before Wi-Fi on planes, so I get on my 4.5-hour flight from New York to LA thinking my mom's not going to be there. I land, and I've got a voicemail from my mom at DFW Airport saying she was getting on her plane and she was landing about 10 minutes after me. So we got to ride in together, got to meet her at the airport, and we got to go to the hotel together. And it's a great memory. It's a great...
Where do you go from here? How do you have this one-time experience which results in being invited to speak across the country to gay events, Human Rights Campaign Fund, black tie dinners? How do you go from that experience of being a celebrity to deciding whether you want to go back and run for another term where your 50 hours is primarily spent dealing with garbage pickup? Because if you don't keep moving and you don't do something new, the story of the speech goes with time because somebody else is going to do something. Somebody's going to come out, on television, whatever. There's going to be new role models coming out. Do you want to stay in the focus as a representative of a proud, healthy, smart, attractive gay man, or do you feel content to go back to city council and deal with potholes, which we would love to have more attention to in Provincetown?
I'm not sure I can do much about potholes in Provincetown, and it's somewhat challenging at times to deal with it in Fort Worth, Texas. There is no repeating the experience that was this last year and a half. I can't relive it. I can't go, make the next set of comments at a city council meeting that are going to go viral and get 3 million people to watch it. That moment is finite. I'm not going to repeat that or relive that, and I understand that. I have been faced with a lot of opportunities in the last year and a half, many of which I have not pursued. And I've focused on some other things that some folks may say in kind of the trajectory of a national setting may have not been the thing to continue that arc up and onward.
Tell me what you mean by that, because I didn't follow.
Well, there are some things that I could have done over the course of the last year and a half to continue in a more aggressive way to keep my profile elevated.
Right.
I was on a couple of MSNBC shows as a guest, a couple of CNN shows. But I've spent my focus in the last year. I had things going on at home. I have a spouse. We had an unexpected 2 16-year-old foreign exchange students, one from Germany, one from France, that wasn't planned. That was kind of a surprise deal where we had basically a day or two to prepare for it. And then we went from having 0 children to having 2 and being football dads and rugby dads and soccer dads and math club dads and all these things for 2 16-year-olds. My brother was killed in a car accident, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And it was a very full year that I needed to spend some time focusing on my family. And I could have tried, and I could have been more successful at keeping that profile elevated, but I had other things. I had other job descriptions to fill other than the potholes and the sidewalks and the potholes. I had responsibilities as son, as brother, as husband, as dad, that took time. And so I spent my time in ways that were a little more local. I'm very proud of the fact that in Texas, in a not conducive climate, in the Texas legislature, we were able to pass House Bill 1942, which is anti-bullying provision. The Texas legislature before 2010 elections was 76 to 74 Republican majority, 1 seat from parity, and after the Tea Party sweep of that year became 101-49 Republican majority. Veto proof, kind of could do what they want, and yet we were able to get legislators to pass this anti-bullying bill. And for the first time in Texas, starting September 1st, schools will are forced to deal with the bullies, and they're forced to remove the bullies from the class and not their targets. And they have to have an anti-bullying policy.
And you were involved in that?
Yes.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to go down and lobby. In fact, I went with Asher Brown's parents and went to 14 different legislators, 7 on the House Education Committee, 7 on the Senate Education Committee, and basically teed up the reason why this bill was important, and then allowed Asher's mom to tell the story of coming home to cut through the police tape.
Can you stop doing that?
Can I stop doing what?
These things that make a difference in the lives of gay people. Do you have a right to not? Do you have a right to move on with your life and go back to real estate if you want, or go back to just being a city councilor who deals with potholes and is the best city councilor you can be, 50 hours at $23,000 a year? Do you have a right to just do that, or do you feel some obligation that you have to keep being a role model because you're getting a lot of pressure from gay organizations to maintain this visibility because you're an attractive person, spiritually, physically, intellectually? What do you have a right to a private life, or do you feel like you have some obligation to continue being a role model?
The answer is yes and yes. I think there is a right to do that. I think in terms of an obligation, it's more about me and my personality and who I am as a person, that I feel obligated. I don't feel obligated because someone tells me I'm obligated. I grew up in a small town. My mom was the type person who, anytime someone got sick, she baked something or made something. And there was a real sense, I grew up in the United Methodist Church in the 1970s, which was the year I was born was the year 3 churches came together to form the United Methodist Church, and there was a real sense of kind of ecumenical, we're in this together. It really is how I got to be a Democrat, and most people say, a mainline Protestant denomination is how you got to be a Democrat, and it's true. It was very much of we're in this world together,
right,
and we have an obligation to help those who need help. And that was very formative on me as a child.
Me too.
And because of that, it's just part of who I am, that I won't ever stop, seeking out the playground injustices that we were trained over time to look aside from and ignore potentially. That's just part of who I am. And I'll keep doing that. The key way is to find ways to do that. My constituents, I have a job to do, and they notice every time I'm out of town. I mean, you posted about us being out on the boat bass fishing yesterday out in the water and on Facebook, and I'm sure there were constituents of mine who noticed that I was not in Fort Worth and wonder when I'm coming back to do my job. And with that, it's a fine line. I have to continue to do the work that people elect me to do. There's 90,000 people that I represent. And if I'm off hanging out with Ellen and Matt Lauer and with you on the back of your boat in P-Town, they will perceive me to not be doing the job that they elected me to do. And so I have to be omnipresent back home, even though, I may have to take the kids to a Boy Scout meeting or to a football game or to meet JD for something or to go to the hospital with my dad or whatever the case may be. I still have to show up to the neighborhood meetings and to the...
Do you want to do that for 20 more years?
No, absolutely not. I served with a colleague who served for 18 years before he died of cancer, and it was everything about his life, and there's a toll to public service.
What is it?
You talked about the financial aspect of it. I haven't contributed to my retirement account in 5 years, and my husband every month or two says, "I'm paying the mortgage again. What are you doing?" And so there's a financial impact, but there's also a personal.
He doesn't.
No, he's
say
chiding
that.
about it. He gives me a hard time.
Yeah,
he's incredibly supportive of
and
me
he
doing
loves you
this.
completely, and so he makes better money than you, and
Yes.
he is proud of you.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm very fortunate to have him. But there's also a personal toll. I mean, every weeknight I'm gone at some neighborhood meeting, and I'm not there with JD to say, "How was your day?" or to have dinner with him. And so I don't see doing this for 20 years. I see doing it maybe 1 or 2 more terms. And then I'm not too worried about it.
And then what?
I hadn't planned on running for city council to begin with, and it was an opportunity that actually knocked a couple of times, and I finally decided to do it, and it changed my life in incredible ways. And there will be other opportunities that knock, whether it's continued elective office, serving in the legislature. I would welcome that opportunity in some capacity when an opening is available, or working for a nonprofit or a foundation in the future might be an opportunity. Right now, I'm focused on this remaining year of my 2-year term and looking to one more term. But beyond that, I'm not making any definitive plans.
Are you a religious person?
I grew up in the United Methodist Church. I don't, we go, we're a backsliding Methodist and backsliding Catholic who on Easter and Christmas go to the very Church of Scotland Presbyterian Church in our neighborhood, or to my mom and dad's church where my mom still plays the piano. I actually had the opportunity to speak at a service just this past week, at my mom's little church in Crowley, Texas, and my mom played the piano and I got to give part of the message, and so it was nice to do that. But I wouldn't consider myself an overly religious person.
So what about the message that you got about service to others? That's a spiritual thing?
It's a deeply ingrained thing. It's very much a part of my upbringing with my parents and with kind of the larger community. It was also a different day and age. You all know that we continue to have a much more segmented society and segmented community than what it was when you grew up and when I grew up. And when I grew up, I couldn't do anything in the little town of Crowley without someone calling my mom and let her know before I ever got home that I'd done something I wasn't supposed to do. Community is less like that, I think, than it was when we were kids. But yeah, it's just a part of my upbringing and part of my philosophy about the world we live in.
You're one of the best and brightest in your generation of gay people.
That's very kind. I'm not sure you're
No,
correct,
you
but
are.
I appreciate
Well,
that.
I don't know what your grades were, but you're a real smart guy. I mean, Ray and I listened to you and observe you. The country has changed dramatically since I came out in 1974 at age 26, when my parents got death threats when I came out, rather than any congratulatory messages, as did I. So here we are 37, 8 years later, and we're talking about gay people getting married and adopting and now serving in the armed forces openly. Where are we going? When you're going to be, all things considered, you'll be around 20 years longer than I will be. What do you think it's going to look like?
I think that we have reached critical mass. There is a tipping point we have passed in terms of our larger American culture being supportive of really fundamental, basic rights, like the ability to marry, the ability to serve in our armed forces. We are electing gays and lesbians, and our focus. I was at an event that Tammy Baldwin, who's running for U.S. Senate, was at yesterday, and she talked about the fact that she goes to all these towns in Wisconsin. They don't ask her about being gay. They ask her about the economy and the federal budget and things like that. And so many of the things, like for example when the Victory Fund was created, we're starting to get to that critical mass of having elected officials. But in many ways we also are so far, and you see this in the work that you do in corporate training, where these Fortune 500 companies have these non-discrimination policies. They have these great HR policies that give benefits to same-sex partners, etc. And the executives feel quite good about that, as well they should. It's an important thing to do, and yet they may not realize or recognize that there's a culture and a climate within their corporation that still prevents the guy who just got out of college from placing his partner's photo on his desk, or prevents the woman who's been at the company only for 4 or 5 years from saying to her boss, I've met a new girlfriend, or prohibits her from coming out in an open and fully kind of vested way. And there's a lot of work to be done in those areas that are more subtle. We're getting the laws on the books. I think marriage equality will happen nationwide. I think some of the real battles in the next year or two actually are not so much the battle for marriage equality, because I think we've gotten the states where that's going to happen. We've got a battle in Maryland and a battle in Washington State, obviously, and potentially in Minnesota. But the reality is that we've gotten the states where that's going to happen on a state-by-state basis largely. The next theater for that is on a federal level, and it's very dependent upon who our president is and who our president will appoint to be future Supreme Court justices as to the outcome of that. And when Texas gets marriage equality, it's going to be the same day that Kansas gets marriage equality and Mississippi gets marriage equality. It's not going to happen in our legislature. It's going to happen federally. But between now and that point, there are some real opportunities in terms of state legislation for bullying prevention and for non-discrimination ordinances.
Do you think bullying prevention actually does anything? I mean, in terms of legislation?
The legislation gives tools to the administrators and the principals who don't feel right now that they have any tools, don't feel enabled. If Mrs. Jones reports 13 instances of bullying in her classroom in a semester and Mrs. Smith reports 0 instances, oftentimes the perception is that Mrs. Smith is a better teacher because she has her class under control. And she doesn't have her class under control any better than Mrs. Jones does. It's just Mrs. Jones is reporting it. But there's a stigma to Mrs. Jones doing that makes her want to pull back from doing so. And if you've got the policies in place that protect the teachers, that give them the tools that they need, both the training and the cover for calling out the bullies in their classrooms and for separating them from their targets, which is going to make the parents mad that their kid was taken out of school for behavior that they might be modeling on behavior that they see at home, well then, the teacher is somewhat jeopardized in doing so, and they need to feel like they're fully backed up, and they can't do that without those policies.
And do the policies have any impact on self-esteem?
Self-esteem of who?
The gay kids who are being bullied, and the others, heavy-set kids, short kids, kids with disabilities. I mean, the bullying thing is not just about lesbian, gay, bisexual,
Absolutely.
transgender kids. But, so how do we move the self-esteem forward? How's it?
You asked earlier, what the last year and a half was like, and I said I focused more locally, and I mentioned the efforts in the Texas legislature with the House Bill 1942, but I've also had the opportunity to work with the Fort Worth ISD, the Fort Worth Independent School District, and they've implemented and are actually just started for the school year. Actually, this past year, the school year, they had an initial rollout, but they've changed it significantly for what they call It's Not Okay. And it's not okay to name call, it's not okay to intimidate, it's not okay, and it's bullying plus. But for the first time, starting in the next school year in August, they're actually going to implement an LGBT component of it, which they were afraid to do in the past. And the teachers didn't feel like, and I've talked to many of the Fort Worth ISD teachers because I had 2 kids in school this past year, who say it's welcomed, because even right now there's an intimidation in reporting that out, and the kids themselves like the fact that they're, particularly I speak to the Gay Straight Alliance at the high school that's in my neighborhood, that's in the district I represent, and I try to do that every semester or at least once a year, and those kids will say that they're glad that it's the first time since they've been in school that, other than coming to GSA, that acronyms like LGBT or the words gay and lesbian are used in a non-pejorative way in their schools. And that has to impact them in a positive way.
Impacts them.
Impacts them in terms of their esteem.
Right.
Just the fact that there is a district-wide policy for the Fort Worth Independent School Districts that actually talks about LGBT kids gives them some assurance and reminds them that they're just voicing their name is something I think that gives kids a bit of esteem and recognizes, allows them to recognize that they have resources.
And you being one of them.
I hope so.
Well, you already are. So, Joel Burns, openly gay, Fort Worth city councilor, paid a paltry. Sorry, but you and every other city councilor
Yes, I'm not complaining about that.
deserves a lot more. But thank you for. Did you want to say something?
Before we close, I do want to say something.
Okay.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you not only for leading the way, paving the way, but to also give inspiration and comfort to those of us who have come after you, and that you and Ray have been incredibly warm. You've opened your house in Florida to me. You've opened your house here, and I value and cherish the time that I get to spend with you too. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. You are a sweet man.
I do what I can. My mother and daddy raised me.
They did a very good job.
Madam Secretary.
Announcements by City Council members and staff regarding upcoming and recent events and recognition of citizens.
Now, Mr. Burns.
Yes, sir. Mayor, as you know, we're gathered here today in our pink shirts to bring awareness to the fight against breast cancer here in Fort Worth and across the globe. But tonight I ask my colleagues' indulgence in allowing me to use my announcement time to talk briefly about another issue that pulls at my heart. Ron, would you go ahead and run the parents of Asher Brown, who you can see above, complained to school officials in the Cypress Fairbanks ISD outside of Houston that their son was being bullied and harassed in school. The bullies called him faggot and queer. They shoved him, they punched him, and in spite of his parents' calls to counselors and principals, the harassment, intimidation, and threats continued. For years, it continued. A couple of weeks ago, after being bullied at school, Asher went home, found his father's gun, and shot himself in the head. His father found Asher dead when he came home from work. Asher was 13 years old. I'd like for you to look at his face. Unlike Asher, Indiana teen Billy Lucas, who never self-identified as gay, but was perceived to be by bullies who harassed him daily at the Greenberg Community High School. 3 weeks ago, he hung himself in his grandparents' barn. He was 15 years old. Minnesota 15-year-old Justin Auberg came out to friends at age 13, after which the harassment and bullying began. It grew as he moved from middle school to high school. When he found the harassment more than he could bear, he hung himself in his room and was found by his mother. Classmates started teasing and name-calling Seth Walsh in the 4th grade. It continued through his middle school years, where other students told him the world didn't need another queer and that he should, quote, go hang himself. On September 18th, after being threatened by a group of older teens, he went home, threw a noose around a tree branch, and he did just that. He hung himself in his backyard. His mother saw him, pulled him down. Seth survived on life support for 9 days before dying a couple of weeks ago. He was 13 years old. Teen bullying and suicide has reached an epidemic in our country, especially among gay and lesbian youth, those perceived to be gay, or kids who are just different. In recent weeks, New Jersey teen Tyler Clementi jumped off a bridge to his death after his roommate outed him on the internet. Rhode Island teen Raymond Chase hung himself in his dorm room. And we learned just yesterday of Oklahoma teen Zach Harrington, who killed himself after attending a city council meeting in Norman, Oklahoma, where speakers made disparaging anti-gay remarks. There is a conversation for the adults in this room and those watching to have, and we will have it, that this bullying and harassment in our schools must stop and that our schools must be a safe place to learn and to grow. It is never acceptable for us to be the cause of any child to feel unloved or worthless, and I'm committed to being a part of that conversation. But tonight, I would like to talk to the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds at Paschal and at Arlington Heights and at Trimble Tech High Schools, or at Daggett and Rosemont Middle Schools, or any school in Fort Worth, or anywhere across the country. for that matter. I know that life can seem unbearable. I know that the people in your household or in your school may not understand you, and that they may even physically harm you. But I want you to know that it gets better. When I was 13, I was a skinny, lanky, awkward teen who had grown too tall too fast, who would stumble over my own feet. I was the son of a Methodist church pianist named Jeanette and a cowboy named fittingly Butch in Crowley, Texas. As their son and as a kid in a small town, there was a certain image of who I thought I was supposed to be. But as I entered adolescence, I started having feelings that I didn't understand and couldn't explain, but I knew they didn't mesh with the image of what I thought I was supposed to be. I was a sensitive kid, but friendly. I was a band dork. I played basketball, but not very well. I was teased like all kids, but I was fairly confident, and I didn't let it bother me much. One day when I was in the 9th grade, just starting Crowley High School, I was cornered after school by some older kids who roughed me up. They said that I was a faggot and that I should die and go to hell where I belonged. That erupted the fear that I had kept pushed down, that what I was beginning to feel on the inside must somehow be showing on the outside. Ashamed, humiliated, and confused, I went home. There must be something very wrong with me, I thought, something I could never let my family or anyone else know.
Catch your breath.
I think I'm going to have too hard a time with the next couple of sentences that I wrote, and also I don't want my mother and father to bear the pain of having hear me say them.
Take your time. Take your time.
So I will just say, and I'll skip ahead, I have never told this story to anyone before tonight. Not my family, not my husband, not anyone. But the numerous suicides in recent days have upset me so much and have just torn at my heart. And even though there may be some political repercussions for telling my story, this story is not just for the adults who might choose or not choose to support me. This story is for the young people who might be holding that gun tonight, or the rope, or the pill bottle. You need to know that the story doesn't end where I didn't tell it on that unfortunate day. There is so much more. Yes, high school was difficult. Coming out was painful. But life got so much better for me. And I want to tell any teen who might see this, give yourself a chance to see just how much better life will get. And it will get better. You will get out of the household that doesn't accept you. You will get out of that high school, and you never have to deal with those jerks again if you don't want to. You will find and you will make new friends who will understand you, and life will get so much better. I look back and my life is full of so many happy memories that I wish I could share with those whose photos were shown up above earlier and those who have taken their lives. Memories that I wish I could share with the 13-year-old version of me on that very unfortunate day. If I could, I would take the 13-year-old me by the hand and take him to the campaign office in 1992 of then Governor Clinton, where for a very speechless moment, my now partner J.D. Engel and I saw each other for the first time. I would take that 13-year-old me to the first day of spring in 1999 on a West Texas ranch hilltop, surrounded by a dozen head of black Angus cattle who thought we were there to feed. And as the sun set, turning the sky pink and purple and orange in a way that only a West Texas sunset can, I jabbed my hands into my jeans pocket and pulled out 2 rings that I'd literally spent my last dollar on, and slipped one onto JD's hand and asked him to spend the rest of his life with me. I would take the 13-year-old Joel to election night in 2007 in a room filled with countless family and friends, erupting in cheers when it became clear that I would win my first election, so that they could see the love and support for me that was in the room that night. And I would take the 13-year-old me to just a few days ago at Baylor Hospital to see our dad. Our dad, who's no longer the 40-year-old tough cowboy that he was when I was 13, who I thought would never understand me, but is now the 67-year-old dad, still pretty tough cowboy, who has grown older. And the 13-year-old me would see me today holding my dad's weathered hand and see my dad as he woke up from his operation, and him squeeze my hand and look up at me and say, "Joel, I'm so glad you're here today." And me say back to my dad, "I am too, Daddy. I am too." To those who are feeling very alone tonight, please know that I understand how you feel, but things will get easier. Please stick around to make those happy memories for yourself. It may not seem like it tonight, but they will. And the attitudes of society will change. Please live long enough to be there to see it. And to the adults, the bullying and the harassment has to stop. We cannot look aside as life after life is tragically lost. If you need resources, please check out the trevorproject.org online. And you can call me and I will get you whatever resources you need. My number is 817-392-8809. I want to thank those in this room for allowing me this time. And to JD and the rest of my family, I'm sorry for you learning of this painful personal story in this public way for the first time. But know that I am able to tell it because of your love for me. And Mom and Dad, I'm alive today because you love me. Again, attitudes will change. Life will get better, and you will have a lifetime of happy memories if you just allow yourself and give yourself the time to make them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute recess and we'll get back to the agenda.
Gotta have pride. Been around too long to keep it inside. Pride. Can't sit back and watch from the side. Pride